Is the topic for tonight is what does it mean to live in reciprocity with nature, to live with an awareness of all living beings. This is tonight's Zoom talk. And here's the program for tonight. We're going to do a quick introduction to the Sustainable Resource Committee, a land acknowledgement, and then all together we're going to watch a video interview with Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer. And then we'll have a group discussion after the video. And we have a couple of questions to get us started, to think about what does it mean to live in reciprocity with nature, and what does it mean to live with an awareness of all living beings. So welcome. Today's free talk is hosted by the Sustainable Resource Committee, which is dedicated to promoting sustainable community environments within the greater Snoqualmie Valley that seek to lean forward into the future and not only survive, but thrive. We are committed to relationship building among people and groups, as well as among people and nature. And the work of this committee primarily involves supporting and connecting with farmers, educators in both academic and indigenous cultures, and other like-minded individuals. This free informational talk is a part of a series of activities towards our goal of building a sustainable community in the Snoqualmie Valley. And the Sustainable Resource Committee is sponsored by the Baha'i Faith. So I would like to take a moment and do a land acknowledgement. I would like to recognize the ancient relationships that Indigenous people in our region have with the land. And the land acknowledgement is also a part of our humanity's goal of building a just relationship with the land. And we'd like to honor Coast Salish peoples. I am calling from Redmond Ridge, and according to this map, I live on the ancient traditional homelands. There's an overlap among the Duwamish, the Stillaguamish, and the Coast Salish people. But I feel a really close connection to my location to the Snoqualmie tribe. If you'd like to learn more about the ancient Native relationships with the place that you live, the native-land.ca it's a worldwide map of Native relationship to land. And just like you can see from here, there's a lot of overlap of where people would gather and share resources. But land acknowledgements are an important part of us recognizing and honoring these ancient relationships that tribes have with their homelands. I did want to bring up that we're starting to put together quarterly newsletters, and you can share your events, recipes, and goodwill with the community by emailing me. We're also looking for future guest speakers if you have an idea of someone that you think would be a good fit with what we've been doing. Or if you'd like to suggest a topic for our free online talks, you can email demerix@gmail.com for newsletter or speaker submissions. We'll be planning our next newsletter. I think, was it next month? Maybe the end of next month. So, okay, that's it for a little introduction. And Karosh is going to share the video that we will all watch together. And then when the video is done, then we'll open it up for a discussion.
Robin, I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Likewise.
We're here at a conference that's celebrating confluence. And it struck me as I was looking at your bio that you're kind of a living example of confluence. You're a botanist,
Yes.
a philosopher, natural historian, Native American mythologist, writer. You bring together a lot of things in your life and in your work. How did that come to be? How is it that you've got fingers in so many different pies?
Oh, what a good question. And it hasn't always been that way. I think it's been, for me, a journey circling around to wholeness. Because, when we're children, we don't make those distinctions, do we?
No.
Between poetry and nature and science and art. We just don't. But I remember very distinctly when I was going to college that I had to decide whether I wanted to be a poet or a botanist. And it was
So that was really wonderful. And I have completely forgot. Let me find the questions that we have. So what does it mean? Sorry, hold on. What does it mean to live in reciprocity with nature? And what does it mean to live with an awareness of all living beings? I don't know if anyone would like to answer, respond with thoughts about that, or just general response to the interview. I've listened to Dr. Kimmerer speak a couple of times. Like she's got some really great presentations, but this is what a really good interview that I think really dug into the reason why she does the work that she does. So does anyone want to speak about what the interview made them think, or if you have any like more questions that it brings up for you? I do think that in general, reciprocity is a word that we don't use very often, and that we should learn to use more often. Hey, Jason, I didn't know you were here. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I just snuck in a few minutes ago, but I caught the tail end of it. It was wonderful. And I was just listening to a talk that Dr. Kimmerer gave yesterday. So I've been thinking a lot about reciprocity. So I like that you picked up that word particularly. I feel like that last thing she was talking about is really crucial in terms of getting something from the land, like food or medicine from the land. Something that's easy for us to focus on is the negative side of what's missing in reciprocity, and saying we're not giving to the land, we're not caring for the land, and we need to do that more. But if we're not actually getting sustained physically directly by the land, that's also not reciprocity. If we go out and clean up a creek and then go home and buy food from the grocery store, like that's also a one-way relationship, and then we're not supported in caring for the land. So for me, what I really loved what she said right at the end, like it has to have both directions, and if either direction is out of balance, it becomes extractive one way or the other.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I recently worked on an essay about food sovereignty, and one of the things I started to think about is that even with gardening, there's a sense of control, but there's a lot of humility that you get when you're out in a wild place, and when you gathered from nature. Like, you didn't plant it, you didn't plan, you didn't like, you go out and gather it, and it's waiting for you, and all of the conditions are right leading up to the area, like creating this gift for you. And I think there's just so much more humility that comes from gathering in nature versus feeling like, oh, I grew. I want people to garden also, but I think going out and gathering from natural places is also a really important thing to do, because that is one of the times when you're going to feel like you are receiving a gift. And yeah, I also think that everything has to line up for that gift to happen. And that makes you appreciate the weather, the plants, the animals, the bees and the birds, and everything that's interacted with the being that Dr. Kimmerer is describing. That everything all the conditions have to be right, and then you get this wonderful, amazing gift. And I also think it's important to feel thankfulness while you're gathering for everything leading up to that moment. And yeah, I agree about our relationships to place and to land. It has to be in both directions. We have to learn how to be open to the messages that the world is giving to us. Yes, Donna?
I was comparing my childhood and young adulthood time in Maine to living in a few other states, Massachusetts, North Carolina, and here, in an urban setting. And I was thinking that as a younger person, one of the things my family did was actually gather dandelions to eat. And there was no talk about it. They just did it, and they were delicious. And I have mentioned that in other places when people are spraying Roundup and saying it's edible. I mean, what's so bad about a dandelion? I didn't really get it, but it was that disconnect that people didn't understand that was a gift. It's a gift. It's not a weed. For some people it's a weed, and other people it's a flower, or edible. I took it for granted, and I have lived with that, taking it for granted all this time. And I don't feel like I should. That's why I'm speaking up about it. That's the awareness. And for me, it came through not observation per se, but I was being taught. So I was observing. And I was told that it was good, and it is good to eat. But others haven't had that opportunity. They haven't gone out and had their hands in the dirt or had someone do that. So if you don't have that, it's hard to actually, I think about the reciprocity. Yeah, my mouth is dry. Sorry. Reciprocity around it. You have to have the awareness first. So the responsibility she talked about, I think, is for those of us that may be around people who don't have the awareness, is to model it and speak up that it's not a weed, it's a dandelion, and you can eat it in a nice way, of course. Here, come to my house when they can, when the pandemic is over, come and I'll serve you dandelions. Thank you, Tamaris.
Oh. Good. I think that the idea of these things from plants and other aspects of the world being gifts is really interesting. And I think a lot of times when we think about reciprocity, we kind of still place ourselves like in an upper hierarchy, like we're doing these things to help, like we're helping the earth, we're solving climate change, we're doing restoration. And to think of the parts of the natural world, plants and rivers and mountains and animals, as being these just powerful beings that have as much agency as we have to give us something, I think is a really big mind shift, and definitely one that I'm still thinking of, but it's really beautiful. Donna, I'd like to hear talk about the dandelion and talk about them as giving us a gift, and to, you know, talk about going out and collecting wild foods and thinking about them as these beings that have this really powerful agency to give us things. And I think that's like a really important part of this mind shift that, you know, I'm sort of slowly coming through over time, is to remember that, you know, we're imagining us all in this like circle, whereas, you know, our sort of Western mindset is like humans are in the center, and, you know, these things give us things because, you know, and just, they're not here because of us. They're here in spite of us, and they're still sharing with us and wanting to have relationship with us. It's kind of a neat mind shift. Thank you for bringing that up.
You need to unmute yourself, Charlotte.
I thought I had. I can't get this straight. That's my challenge too. I mean, it's one of my challenges, is this idea, this personhood of other beings. I mean, I like it. I think kids kind of do that naturally in a way without realizing it, you know, that they can talk to rocks, and they have this sort of this attraction to things that are natural. But I think we might lose that as we get older. And part of it's just the conditioning, you know, living in the society that we live in. But just when you, and she writes about this, and it just makes so much sense, when you begin to think of things as beings, and like you said, having agency just as we humans do, then you think about them differently. You develop this sense of caring for them. So that reciprocal sense of responsibility and caring, you don't want to hurt them, you want to care for them once you begin to recognize their personhood. But it just, wrapping my brain around a personhood, I mean, it's a little bit different than, I can go out and talk to a bird in the morning, you know, there's one on the bush outside the door, but to actually think of that bird as in that other light, that's a challenge. But it makes everything a lot more meaningful. I love that shift in thinking.
Go ahead, Mary.
You're muted now.
Yeah, unmute yourself.
Yeah, that reminds me, in reading this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, there's a lot about reciprocity and gratitude. And it reminds me of the sort of shock I gave myself, maybe a couple of weeks ago. And I was out in the backyard, and I came by, and I was walking by the tree that is big, and it provides a lot of shade in the summertime. And I put my hand on the trunk, and I said, thank you for the shade. I had never, ever in my life done something like that, but there was and what made me do it this time was that word she used, awareness. So I became aware of that gift that had been there the whole time. And I might have said, it provides a lot of shade in the summer, rather than personalizing it and acknowledging it directly to the tree. So, I mean, I agree, it's a mind shift, and it feels a little odd at first, but I'm working on it.
I think a lot about that. What's the process for changing the way you view your world, your role in the world, and your place and the role of everything else, all the life. Like, you can hear it, but how do you like actively change, and like how do you remind yourself to go through a lasting change? And I think there are a lot of issues with language, and Dr. Kimmerer brings that up in Braiding Sweetgrass pretty often, about how things are framed. The cultural frame is present in the language, and then we end up having some difficulty with keeping it like, it's like we have to constantly like come up with new ways of stating everything, I guess. One thing that there's a few phrases that like scientific or academic communities, they like to use: ecosystem services or stewardship. And I don't like either of those things, but I haven't found a good replacement for stewardship, because what are we? Are we children of the world? Like, does the world, like, is it Mother Earth? Are we what is it? Like, stewards, there's just something, it's distancing us still. Mm-hmm. And that's something I've struggled with for a long time.
Sounds aristocratic, and it's that same thing that Bridget had mentioned. That's a word that has a hierarchy, conveyance, but she, at the end, they talked quite a bit about actual love. That actual love is really, I think that's the word, that we really do love the earth, that we really do love the plants. We have to love ourselves.
So I wanted to bring up that in the chat, Christina shared a great article by Dr. Kimmerer about the gift economy from Emergence magazine. I've seen this article shared recently.
Podcast. It's really beautiful. It's, short. It's maybe only an hour, not the 14-hour commitment of her whole book. And it's similar themes in that, gratitude and reciprocity are the currency of this gift economy that she talks about in the serviceberry. And of course, I had to go down the rabbit hole of the serviceberry, and I found a farm locally here, Wabash Farm, that actually sells the serviceberry plants. And so now I'm thinking, where on my property can I put one of these things so I can continue to try and cultivate, that feeling. And it's so the language, I think, doesn't explain the feeling that we all sense when we're talking about these ideas. But anyway, I just wanted to share that article because it is definitely worth a listen or read.
I think Bridget might be able to speak a little more about serviceberries, but the Common Acre has a restoration site in Seattle, near Boeing Field, near the south end, but on let's see, directions. On the east side of I-5. They planted serviceberry, and it takes a couple of years for it to establish, but we did a native plant walk last summer, and I got to eat some, and I've never had them before, and they're so good, and they're huge too. And then once I got to know the plant, I've actually seen them growing in some, like, along a fence in a neighborhood that I walk through pretty often. So it's kind of fun to get to know plants that feed us, that they're out there, and they're feeding birds also, but yeah, getting to know them and planting them.
Yeah, she did like a blueberry crossed with an apple. Is that what it tastes like now? This is my new craving. I want to taste the serviceberry before I die.
Yeah, they're like yeah, it's like a gigantic blueberry, and the texture is really hard to describe. But I know the Common Acre Green Line, it's called the Bangor site. You are welcome to go check it out and pick some berries off the tree. That's part of why the project is there. The Beacon Food Forest might also have some serviceberry plants, which is another place to go gather. And then I guess maybe even just looking up what kind of conditions they like to grow in might be able to help you find a good patch.
Yeah, thank you.
So I have a question. Are there resources where you could, I mean, you just mentioned 2 or 3 places that sound intriguing, but I've never heard of them before. How does one find out about these places?
If you like to, I could list one good public place to go walking around in the autumn or late summer and gathering food is Issaquah Gilman Street. In the 80s, they planted fruit and nut trees and also, I think, blueberry bushes. I think there's some cherries. I actually did a little interview with the city planner to ask some questions about that because edible landscaping is something that I was interested in. And he was saying, the person I interviewed, they said, really think long term when you plant these things. And but those were planted in Issaquah as part of a desire to have that edible landscaping that you can go interact with it and pick from the trees and the bushes.
That's my neighborhood, and they are just beautiful. I mean, that long-term, long-range thinking is really paying off now. And one of the things I was introduced about the neighborhood by a friend was that it attracts a lot of people to come and actually glean those fruit trees. And they are in different places, and they're definitely varieties. And they're just beautiful. They're beautiful all year long, without leaves or with leaves, with fruit, without fruit. It's really, they had a wonderful arborist and department that did work here for a while. So I'm fortunate. That's one of the things I feel like I have a gift given to me, having moved here, even though I'm in the middle of an urban city of 55,000 people and a lot of traffic.
I was just remembering there's that orchard at Carkeek Park. I forget the name of the orchard, but there's some old apple trees there, and there's a few, like several different varieties. Actually, Jason, were you part of making the tags for were the trees there or somewhere else? Identification tags. I just remember seeing metal stamped tags that were on the trees there, and some of the it has information about where the apple variety came from. I'm not sure if they remember when each tree was planted. But Beacon Food Forest is I don't remember when they started, but that's like a relatively newer project. But they do offer a lot of programs for learning how to take care of the plants, and the goal is to help people gather plants there too. Another org that you could get connected with if you wanted to volunteer to gather fruit is City Fruit. They glean from trees in people's backyards and then donate the food to local food banks. They also make a cider every year. Where they gather thousands of pounds of fruit. I don't know if anyone else has any other gardens that they know of that. I wish it was a little easier to go go and pick instead of the, there's a lot of like needing permission to be in a place.
There's a new little there's a food forest that's just getting started in Duval, that's on Cherry Valley Road by the Doherty Farmstead, that historic house that's on sort of near Cherry Valley Dairy, and they have like vegetable crops that are going, but also some fruit trees and shrubs, and like more and more things all the time. A lot of the, like you said, trees take a while to get started, but it's all open for folks to come collect from also.
Wow. Doing that, who's creating that?
Well, there's a man, Jeff Davis, that's managing it, but it's owned by the city of Duval, and there's like a board of directors also. So yeah, and they have volunteer days like every other Saturday. So there's days where you can come participate, and then they just will post, or they have a newsletter also saying like what things are available when, and you can come.
To know that cities are doing things like that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
that's great.
I was going to say that one of the ways that I know, Bridget, you said we always have ways to solve things. I think you were the one that mentioned that maybe. But bringing awareness, your farm is doing a wonderful job by doing, youth education. With that kind of education, they're exposed, and there's that awareness is given to them for a lifetime. Therefore, they will reciprocate and take more responsibility and love more their environment. And I'd like to see that, I think also many of the schools have adopted programs where they have taken, usually that's the 8th grade, somewhere 6th or 8th grade, and they'll take those that grade, and then they'll take them to like North Bend for a wilderness, urban wilderness experience. And I'm not sure, what can you tell us about what you're doing, Bridget, there at Oxbow?
Yeah. So our education team does a variety of things that, like in the non-COVID times during spring and fall, they have kids come, like kids from school groups come out and do field trips, and then in the summertime they have sort of a longer, like a week-long day summer camp, and it's pretty neat, especially those longer experiences, because we do have, we have a lot of natural areas, and so their time can be spent doing some like gathering of, food type things. They've done things with like gathering things for food, or making tea, or making like natural dyes, and just kind of like seeing how we have those different relationships with the natural world. But also usually it contains an aspect also of service. So they do some like gleaning and collecting for like Hope Link or other food bank organizations. And yeah, so a lot of different things, sort of depending on the length of time with kids. But I think a lot of it is just letting them be outside, and just letting them experience it without telling them, how to experience it, or what to do, or what to think, or what to feel, which is kind of something I think all of us need, to be able to sort of draw our own conclusions, right, about the world around us.
As one thing, I forget what made me think of it, but when I started working with mason bees and learned about all the different ways, like how intelligent they are, they have memory, They have to learn how to feed from different flowers. They build they build things. They use mud to build their nest. It just made me look at insects differently and think about, like, if bees have a lifetime of memories, they only live for like a month or two, but they still have personalities. They have memory throughout that time. They also get what is the word? The I can't remember the word, but they when they get older, they will forget what they're supposed to do, and they'll just gather food instead of like doing the steps that they're supposed to do. So yeah, it just made me think, like, if bees are this complicated, what else are insects doing that we don't even know that they're doing? And then there's microscopic insects. Like, we all have mites on our eyebrows and eyelashes we don't even know are there. There's like bacteria. Like, everything has intelligence and memory, and like they have their own lives.
Senior moments. That's
Yes, yeah. I couldn't remember what phrase I wanted to use for it.
Something that's recently in my urban little parkish place of living, I think they were sparrows, and they were acting really weird, and they kept hitting the window, and I'd never had that happen before. They were doing it on a regular basis. Once in a while is one thing, and I had nothing for them to actually be attracted to. Well, it turned out that that they were sick with what is it? I couldn't believe it. I can't figure out how they got it. I seen enough information about it, but the bacteria that they're getting or had gotten was serious enough so that the Audubon Society and the Fish and Wildlife said not to feed the birds.
Is that the salmonella outbreak? Yeah.
I was thinking salmonella. That's exactly right. And they said it was because of the people weren't cleaning their feeders, but I mean, people haven't been cleaning their feeders for years. So it had to have been a different type of salmonella, in my opinion. It's only my opinion, not having done any research on it. And so, but it was the behavior. It was the behavior that was odd to me, that this should have happened. And they congregated so close, which they didn't normally do either. It wasn't so much they were fighting over the food to get to the food. It's just that they didn't seem to know what to do about the food as well as eat the food. And then finally, obviously, enough people started to be aware and ask questions. Those people who love and watch birds all the time. So then they did the research, I guess. They blamed it on unless the food itself was contaminated and was coming through with people actually purchasing it. But we no longer have any birds around, which is sad. Finches. It was finches.
That's one thing that we can do is plant food. I mean, plants that feed the birds. I think we're getting close to the end of our time together, but I think a big takeaway for me tonight is to remember to think about, it's easy for us to express love to the world, but how can we be mindful about feeling the world loving us back? Because we need a two-way relationship. So I guess we're just gonna keep thinking about that, because I know it's easy for me to think of like traditional cultural examples of when I do this thing, then I feel the world loving me back. But on a day-to-day basis, I don't have a very strong sense of the world is loving me. So I think that's something that I'm going to take away from tonight. Does anyone want to share? Yes, Charlotte.
She talked about getting out into nature, just being there, exposing yourself to it, and just putting your hands in the dirt. So I think that's it. I mean, if we live, you know, for a lot of people, when things are the way they typically are without a pandemic, you know, you live in a world that's paved over, it's full of traffic. You don't really experience nature a lot. But, you know, but now it's nice to know about all these urban forests and these different projects, and just actually getting outside and maybe paying attention to what is there, what is accessible, and just allowing yourself to experience that. I think just deliberate awareness, you know, making yourself sort of work at it. And I think once you do that, it becomes, I think you just kind of crave more and more exposure to that world of nature, you know, once you begin to expose yourself. But I think sometimes it takes a while to develop that. But just being, yeah, just getting outside and maybe experiencing dirt and smelling plants and listening to what it sounds like outside without traffic, if you can do that. One thing I want, I guess I want to ask anybody to expand on this, but one of the things I wrote down that this issue of rights of nature and this emerging jurisprudence relating to nature and the things in the natural world, that's a concept I'd like to know more about at some point. Yeah.
Maybe that can be looked into as a possibility for a Zoom talk.
Yeah,
we can all learn about it. Wouldn't that be interesting?
Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
But I also like what Donna brought up about dandelions, because we don't have to really go that far to find examples of natural gifts.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of weeds are actually good medicine and good food. We've just forgotten that they're there for us. Oh, yes, Sandy.
Do I sound okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was having computer problems. Okay. So when Donna was talking, I kept thinking about, you know, when I was a kid in New Jersey, we used to pull the dandelion leaves, and my mom would make salad with that. That was really neat. And my mom grew up in the city, New York City. So us moving to New Jersey was her first exposure to anything country. So I'm sure it was like, oh, all this new stuff, right? So we have dandelion salad. It was very good. And another thing that I was thinking, we were talking about plants and stuff and reciprocity or just feeling. She would, if we pulled leaves off of a tree or a flower or something like that, she pulled our hair one time and says, how do you like how that feels? And so it made us conscious about not just destroying nature.
Huh.
Good job, Mom.
Yeah.
Well, but she was actually assigning personhood, actually, wasn't she, to the,
Yeah.
I think she was also teaching you how to respect, and it is, we should gather plants with a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So we just didn't like to just pick flowers just so that they would die. You know, they're prettier on the bush than in a vase, and then they die, and, you know, they last longer on the bush than they do in a vase of water.
and then they're there for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, does anyone have any last thoughts or comments?
I was just going to say that one of the things that really stood out to me that Dr. Kimmerer said was what they're talking about the crisis of loneliness, and then she said, what if the natural world is also lonely for us? And yeah, I like thinking about that, because I think sometimes we think the solution in helping or doing something good for the natural world is to take us out of the equation. And so to think about it that way definitely like shifts my mind. And we actually at work watched Dr. Kimmerer spoke at it was like a conference about rivers, and she said something super similar, that where she said, you know, people are like thankful for rivers and the gifts that they give us and stuff. And she said, but what if the rivers were thankful for us? And so, you know, sort of along the same lines of like truly then, like how are you being in this world as a true partner with all of these other beings? So that was my big takeaway amongst many other little takeaways.
I like that.
Amen.
Alice, did you have something you wanted to say? You're muted. You're muted.
I always think whenever people talk about love, that it's the most powerful force in the universe, I think, is love, you know. So we just have to open ourselves to be able to not only give love, but to accept love, I think sometimes. And then I noticed that particularly in the Northwest, whenever I drive where there's trails, people are obsessed with hiking in this area. So a lot of people are called to be in nature. It's like they need to be in nature. It doesn't matter if it's raining or whatever it's doing. It's like they feel like they need to be out there. And I just think in our divided world now, people need they need the love from the earth, and they don't realize that they're seeking that strong force. They don't realize what it is that they're out there for, but perhaps it's to feel that love when they're just treading on a trail and hearing the birds. And anyway, when she talked about love, it's like, it's so powerful, and we just sometimes take it for granted.
Yeah. Foundational.
I find it's a new thought, and it's challenging to think that nature might be thankful or grateful to us, because I think of the earth as being better off or more natural or more safe if there weren't human beings on it, right? I mean, all these other things would be living in their balance. You know, the only thing that would affect them would be, you know, whatever astrological or astronomical phenomena, or, you know, things that happen on the planet itself, you know, an asteroid hitting it or whatever. I mean, those things that can't be controlled, but that everything else on planet Earth, human beings have the potentiality of destroying it, you know, knocking it out of balance. So I tend to think of negatively of our part on the planet. Yeah. So it's a challenge to try to think of it the other way.
Go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. So I don't know how well this is going to work, but I'm going to try to share a picture here Oh no, it's not working at all. It's a picture of Gary Oak Meadow with camas growing in the understory. There we go. Maybe that'll work a little better. Nope, not at all. Okay, so there's a gorgeous, beautiful meadow.
If you hold
with-
it back a certain way, it's showing a little right there.
There
Yeah.
we go.
There, right
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
Don't come
thank you.
closer. Yeah, don't come closer because that's what blacks it out.
Okay, so it's a gorgeous ecosystem. It's beautiful. It's got tons of food for wildlife, fantastic habitat. And this ecosystem basically only exists with people tending it.
Mm.
The Gary Oak Meadows that are like, this is a defining special thing of the Salish Sea area. This exists because of the Salish peoples. When the Salish peoples have been removed from these ecosystems, the ecosystems turn into coniferous forests. This disappears. Like all this beauty, and this supports way more deer, way more birds, way more of all life and people. So for me, when I'm thinking of that, like this is the picture that pops into my head of this is what humans can do uniquely, and we have to do this or it disappears.
Thank you.
So 3 cheers for Salish peoples.
So where is that located, Jason?
I'm not sure where this particular picture is. There's some intact Gary Oak Meadows down by, what's the name? Tenino? Like down in that area, there's some. Most of them have been destroyed. There's not much left, but down by Tenino, there's some.
Oh.
So when
Out
you
on
say
the
just-
San Juan Islands too, I think.
There were a lot of camas prairies in the Seattle area. Alki was actually camas. Yeah, I was gonna say there are a lot of examples. If you want to read a whole book about it, Changes in the Land. I can't remember the author's name. But that's an example of the way that the New England area indigenous people managed the landscapes, and that they did it in such a way that when there is a change in nature, it actually increases biodiversity. So, and the way that you can do that is with flooding or fires or chopping some trees down. So that book does a really good job of explaining how creating overlapping ecosystems, like a patchwork, when there's 2 different ecosystems overlapping, that's different than each thing. And then there's all this edges, right, Jason, from permaculture principles. Like there's edges between the ecosystem overlap where there's more diversity and there's actually more production because of that. So I think, yeah, we need to challenge the way that we talk about land management and the role that humanity plays. I really believe that nature wants us to exist. Like we were created by nature. We are creatures of nature, and the world wants us to be here. And yeah, there's a lot of examples of groups of people around the world, indigenous groups, where they just like Jason was showing, that they created the ecosystems. And it wouldn't. New Jersey is the Garden State. It was called the Garden State because it was created by indigenous people there. Big open spaces between these trees that you could drive your horse and carriage between because of that. Donna, you had a thought?
I just thought Jason's picture and a reassurance to Sandy was a perfect example of reciprocity.
Yeah.
That and I know we've all been struggling with that reciprocity, but that's a great example of it.
Mhm.
well as what you have just said, Damaris. And New Jersey, despite all of its location with all of the population, still preserves some of that. I mean, a good deal of that area, and is still very productive in a good balancing way of providing New England with, vegetables, edible food. So this is wonderful talk. I'm so glad we did it. It really, it's nice to be able to talk about this out loud, because, and very thankful and grateful for this doctor. She's incredible, very courageous to come forward and start, helping us, see ourselves in a world maybe differently.
Oh, so she's going to be in Seattle. Oh, no, she's not going to be in Seattle. This is a virtual event, but it's through Seattle Arts and Lectures. And that's just lectures.org. And she's going to be here she's being featured April 21st. And the tickets start at $10.
Now I know why you said that you wouldn't see me there, Charlotte. I said, oh, let's do that together. I was just sure we'd be done with this pandemic and we could all go out together here.
Well, and I want to thank you, Damaris, for leading us in this discussion and helping us understand some of the concepts. Certainly your study and your work and your love of this subject shows forth. So thank you very much.
Yes.
Yes.
And for everybody who contributed too, I think that Bridget and Jason and all the people that also contributed, thank you. It kind of opens up more questions than it answers, doesn't it? I mean, just makes you want to dive in, and I'd like to go outside and put my hands in the dirt right now.
Getting close. It's almost March. Getting close.
Well, I had to do it so much that it is indoors, even though Jane said, oh goodness, when I told her that I was going to get a wall planter. But I got my hands in the dirt.
I wish I liked to do that, but I just don't even like transplanting.
Well, I'm going to say goodnight to you ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so very much for your technical ability, and look forward to seeing everybody in our next Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mwah.
Good night.
Thank you, Karush.
Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Take care.
Bye.
Stay well.